In the heart of Akwa Ibom, where the rivers flow like whispers between the trees, and the sun sets with the golden hues of an ancient song, there lived a young woman named Ekaete. Her beauty was not just in the smoothness of her skin, the elegance of her gait, or the laughter that bubbled from her soul. No, Ekaete's beauty lay in the way she understood the rhythm of the world. Her heart beat to the timeless pulse of her people, the Ibibio. But as much as Ekaete was a child of the earth, of the water, and of the sky, there was something inside her, something untamed, something wild. Her heart longed for more than the stories of old. She wanted a love that was not bound by the past, but a love that could be hers to define. And so the story begins. It was the season of the Ayo festival, a time when the village of Ukbom was filled with vibrant echoes of drums, the swell of brightly colored fabrics, and the rich scent of pounded yam and fresh fish. It was a time when the spirits of the ancestors walked among the living, when traditions flowed like the sacred rivers that wound through the village. Ekaete stood by the edge of the river, her eyes tracing the path of the water as it meandered past the sacred stone. She was deep in thought, her long braids catching the breeze that whispered through the trees. A voice broke through her reverie. Ekaete, it called, a deep and warm voice that carried the strength of a warrior's spirit. She turned and saw him, Okon, the son of the village elder. Tall, strong, his body sculpted like a warrior's, and his eyes gleaming with determination and honor. Okon was the pride of the village. He had won every contest of strength and skill, and his name was sung in every corner of Ukbom village. But for all his glory, there was something else about him that Ekaite could not ignore. Something that spoke to the restless part of her soul. Okon, she greeted, her voice soft, yet her eyes challenging. Okon smiled, his teeth flashing in the sunlight. The festival is tomorrow. Are you prepared for the dance of the ancestors? Ekaite felt a stir in her chest. The dance of the ancestors was sacred, a tradition passed down through generations. It was an honor to be chosen to represent the village youth. Every year, a young woman and man performed the sacred steps, invoking the spirit of the elders. But Ekaite had never felt at ease with these confines of the rituals. She nodded, but inside her heart ached. I am prepared, Okon. But sometimes I wonder she trailed off, her voice barely above a whisper. Wonder what? Okon asked, stepping closer, his eyes searching hers. Ekaite met his gaze, her voice faltering. If the dance of the ancestors is truly my own dance, or if it is only the dance of tradition. Then there was a long pause. Okon stood still, considering her words. Tradition is the heartbeat of our people, Ekaete. It is what gives us strength. Without it, we are nothing, he replied, his tone firm. Ekaete sighed, looking down at the ground. She knew he was right. Her own mother, Uyai, had told her the same thing countless times. But the more she danced in the shadow of the elders, the more she felt like her feet were tied to the earth, unable to rise higher. You think too much, Ekaete, Okon said with a smile, but his eyes were softer now. Tomorrow, when you dance, remember that it is for our people, for our ancestors. Let their spirits guide you. I will, she replied, though her heart still longed for something different. As Okon turned to leave, Ekaete watched him go, her thoughts swirling like the river before her. She admired him, respected him, and yet there was a fire in her heart that yearned for more. She wanted a love that was not born of obligation, not of ancestral duty. She wanted a love that was born from her own desire. Could that love exist in the heart of a village so steeped in its ways? The night before the festival, Ekaite found herself by the river again. The moon hung high above, casting its silvery glow over the water. She thought of Okon, of his strong arms, of his voice that promised her protection, of his smile that always seemed to reassure her. But tonight, something was different. She was no longer a mere girl from the village tonight. She was a woman on the edge of a voice. Between the love that was expected of her and the love she dreamed of, from the shadows, another figure emerged. It was Ime, a stranger to Ukpom. He had arrived only a week before, a wanderer who had no ties to the village but who seemed to possess a deep understanding of its people. Ime's eyes were as deep as the night sky, and his smile was like a promise of a future untold. I knew I would find you here, Ime said, his voice low and melodic, almost like the sound of a distant drum. Ekaete turned, her heart fluttering in her chest. What do you want, stranger? Ime stepped closer, the moonlight illuminating his face. I want nothing, Ekaete, except to see you dance. Not the dance of tradition, but the dance of your heart. I want to see you free. Ekaite's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. You do not understand, she whispered, her eyes flicking to the distant village. I am bound to tradition. It is my duty. And what about your desires? Ime asked, his voice a quiet challenge. My desire, Ekaite's voice trailed off as she searched for the words. It is for something more. But I fear that if I follow it, I will betray everything my people stand for. Ime's gaze softened and he stepped even closer to that so that they stood more mere inches apart, the ancestors danced in the wind. Ekaite. They were once like you, torn between love and duty. They understood that to honor them, you must first honor your own heart. That is the dance. Ekaite's heart raced as she felt the pull of Ime's words. His presence. Could she really choose love over tradition? Could she stand before her people and dance not as a daughter of the elders, but as a woman who had chosen her own path? She didn't know, but as she looked into Ime's eyes, the answer seemed to lie just beyond her grasp. I have to go, she said softly, turning away. Ime reached out and gently touched her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. Think about it, Ekaite. I think about the dance of your heart. As Ekaite walked back to the village, the weight of tradition and desire pressed upon her chest like the heavy rhythms of the drum. The next day, the festival would begin, and she would stand before her people. Would she dance with the spirit of the ancestors, or would she choose to dance her own truth, no matter the cost? The dance of tradition and desire was about to begin, and Ekaite was the one who would decide which rhythm would guide her. As the first light of dawn broke over Ukpom, the village stayed with excitement. The drums began to beat, calling the people to sacred grounds where the festival would unfold. Ekaite, dressed in the traditional garment of her people, brightly colored beads and intricate patterns, stood before her mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her attire. But it wasn't just the weight of the beads on her skin that made her hands shake. It was the weight of the decision she had made the night before by the river, when Ime's words had whispered through her soul like a sweet breeze, urging her to choose her own path. And now, the time to choose was here. Her mother, Uyai, entered the room, her face glowing with pride, but there was something in her eyes, something Ekaete had never seen before. It was as if Uyai sensed the shift in the air, the change in her daughter. Ekaete, you look beautiful, Uyai said, her voice warm. The ancestors will be proud of you today. You will dance for them, and the blessings will follow you throughout your life. Ekaete looked into her mother's eyes, and for the first time, she didn't feel certain. She felt the tension between the love she had been taught to honor and the love that was calling to her from deep within. Mama, she began, her voice soft but resolute. What if the ancestors do not want me to follow their path? We are his face softened, but there was a flicker of concern who we are, who we will always be. We dance because the spirit have asked us to, because the ancestors lived through it. We honor them when we obey. But what if I'm more than just the dance of tradition, Mama? Ekaite's voice shook as she spoke, but she held her ground. What if my heart longs for something beyond the steps of the past? Huya's gaze hardened and she took a deep breath. her voice firm. Then you dishonor us all. You dishonor me, you dishonor your father, and you dishonor the village. The elders have chosen you, Ekaete. You must dance for us, the ancestors. Ekaete felt the sting of her mother's words, but they were not enough to quell the storm inside her. She had made up her mind. I will dance, she said, but she added quietly, but I will dance for myself. Her mother said nothing more. She turned and left the room, the sound of her footsteps heavy with the weight of unspoken expectations. Ekaete's heart pounded as she prepared herself, but this time it was not fear that gripped her, it was anticipation. She was about to step into the sacred ground of Ukbom and change the rhythm of her life. The festival ground were alive with color and sound. The elders had gathered, seated in a circle, their faces etched with the wisdoms of fear. The village-based drummers had begun their rhythmic chants, their beats echoing into the air like the pulse of the earth itself. And the center of it all, the young men and women stood ready to take their places in the dance of the ancestors. Ekaete, her feet steady and her heart racing, stood at the edge of the circle. She could feel the weight of the village eyes upon her. She could feel Okon's presence behind her, his pride evident in his postures, his gaze unwavering. He was ready to dance, but when his eyes met hers, there was something in his look, a quiet question, an unspoken understanding. He didn't know what had transpired between her and Ime, but he could sense that Ekaite was no longer just a daughter of tradition. She was something more. As the drumming reached a crescendo, Ekaite stepped forward. The crowd grew silent, waiting for the first beat of her feet to mark the beginning of the sacred dance. But as she moved into the center of the circle, her body felt different. The rhythm of the drums was calling to her, yes, but there was something else, a new rhythm, a pulse from within. She felt it like a fire in her chest. Her feet moved, but they did not follow the steps she had learned instead. They moved freely, flowing like the river, graceful yet untamed. The crowd gasped, their eyes wide with shock. The elders exchanged glances, their mouths opening in disbelief. This was not the sacred dance of the ancestors. This was something new, something different. Okon stepped forward, his brow furrowed. Ekaite, what are you doing? He called, his voice filled with both confusion and frustration. This is not how we honor the spirit. You are dishonoring the dance. But Ekaite did not stop. Her body swayed with a freedom she had never known before. Her spirit, unchained, danced the way her heart longed to, and in that moment, the world around her seemed to fade. She was no longer just a daughter of Ukbom. She was a woman, a soul dancing to her own rhythm, untethered by the chains of the past. And then from the crowd, a figure emerged. Ime. He stood tall, his presence commanding, his eyes locked onto Ekaete's with a quiet admiration. He had come not to disrupt, but to see her, to witness her liberation. As the drums began to shift, the rhythm changing under Ekaete's feet, she noticed the maid's presence. It gave her strength. His gaze was not one of condemnation, but of understanding. It was as though the spirits themselves were guiding her now, as if they had been waiting for her to dance in her own way all along. Okon's voice rang out again, but this time it lacked the sharpness it had before. Ekaite, you must stop. You are making a mockery of our ancestors. But Ekaite, her eyes locked on Ime, smiled. The ancestors were once young, Okon. They too felt the fire of their hearts. They pull off something more. I am honoring them just as much as I honor myself. With that, she twirled her body, moving with grace and power. The crowd, stunned at first, began to murmur. Then slowly the murmurs grew louder, and soon the entire village was watching, their breaths held in awe. There was something sacred in a dance, something that resonated deep within them. It was not the traditional steps, but it was a dance spoke to the soul. And as a kite danced, the spirit of the ancestors seemed to rise with her, winds of the past joining the winds of the present, creating a harmony between the old ways and the new. The drums shifted, and for the first time in years, the people of Ukbom saw the sacred in a new light. The dance of tradition and desire had become one. As the sun set over the village of Ukbom, the people gathered to honor Ekaite's courage, her heart, and the path she had chosen. She had danced not just for her ancestors but for herself. And in doing so, she had shown the world that tradition and desire could dance together in harmony. The elders, once silenced in their disapproval, now looked upon her with respect. Okon, though still unsure of his place in her heart, bowed his head in acknowledgement of strength, and Ime stood in the distance, watching with a proud smile, knowing that Ekaete had chosen the dance that was truly hers. In the end, Ekaete had not betrayed her people. She had brought them into the future where love, freedom, and tradition could live side by side.